Welcome to the Flight Club Podcast, a woman's guide to leaning out. We give you a behind-the-scenes look at business launch and growth through the stories of successful female entrepreneurs. Here's your host, Felina Hansen, founder and CEO of Hera Hub.
Hello and welcome. I am excited to share my conversation today with Melissa Kovacs. She is freaking awesome. I can't even tell you. I mean, just looking at her bio and her website, I am so excited to learn from her today. She is a statistician with a PhD in public policy and econometrics and is the founder of FirstEval, which is a data analytics and statistical consulting company. She's based out of Phoenix, works out of Hera Hub, Phoenix, and she focuses on providing statistical expertise in the nonprofit space, the corporate space, and in the government sectors. But she also works within litigation as well, which I'm really, really excited to learn more about. Melissa is fanatical about finding meaning in data and seeing organizations make data-driven decisions that, of course, forward their missions. And this is like the buzzword, right? Like big data, big data, big data. So welcome to the show today, Melissa.
Felina, thank you so much. Thanks for that great introduction. I'm really thrilled to be here talking with you.
Well, I am thrilled to have you, and I'm thrilled to talk about big data. So, but before we get into your current business and what you're up to, take us back. Take us back all the way to where you're from. Where'd you go to school? Why'd you study? What you studied? All that good stuff, and then we'll get into your career path.
Sure. So it's kind of a winding road. I grew up in Indianapolis and I went to Purdue University undergraduate and have a degree in accounting. And I was an accountant for a whopping 13 months and realized that wasn't for me. But I love numbers. That part was clear. And so after that, my next pivot was to be a geriatric social worker, which is a complete shift. And at this time I was in Pittsburgh and I realized, okay, I love this. I love the social service side, but I also it was almost too intense and sort of, I knew I was on a path to burnout. And so I found in the middle, which maybe doesn't sound like the middle, but public policy and statistics and applying statistics in the social sector. And so I went to graduate school for, as you mentioned, public policy, took a lot of statistics, econometrics, that sort of thing, and realized that, okay, I finally sort of figured out my major really late.
That's okay. That's okay. You found it. That's the important thing.
Yes. And so after grad school, I was lucky. I had this great tenure track position at a wonderful liberal arts college, Allegheny College in Pennsylvania. Just a wonderful, lovely place and focused on teaching. I also was fortunate there. I had a Fulbright professorship and lived in Germany for a year. And that was an incredible experience. And so I was getting to teach. But I went through a divorce, and so I was living in a small town in Pennsylvania with lake effect snow and realized that that wasn't the life for me in the future. And so this was in 2009. It's the middle of a recession, and I just up and moved to Phoenix, Arizona. So my sister is here in Phoenix, and she was, an inspiration and really helpful. Of course, but otherwise I did not have a job during a recession, and that probably wasn't the wisest move. But that actually is how I started my business, was out of this necessity. When I first moved here in 2009, I just started cobbling together. I had a part-time job, and I had a couple of research for hire projects, and I thought, the project work is pretty fun. I'll just form an LLC and kind of make this official. So I did that, and then in 2010, I I got a website, and that also was inspiring to me, and decided, okay, this is a real thing. This is a business. I can do this.
I
But
love
I was
that.
still
Once your website's up, it's a real thing. I love it. No, it's so
right.
true. Absolutely. And you have a phenomenal website, actually. I've been spending some time on it, so I'm excited
Well,
to dive into that.
well, thank you. And the credit for that goes to my husband. So he was my boyfriend at the time and made a mock-up of the website that really inspired me a lot. So I will pass that along. Thank you.
Of course, absolutely. Before we
So,
get too deep into your business, I want to talk about some of some of the work you've been doing alongside. So I see you've been teaching at Arizona State. Talk a little bit about the work there. And I'm diving into something I see here on LinkedIn. You started off as a project manager, and you were working on Arizona's violent death report system. That sounds
mhm.
really interesting. What is that?
That is really interesting. So every state has a violent death reporting system, which is a terrible name, but it's
Yeah.
actually it's essentially a large public health database.
Mhm.
And in Arizona, it's housed at Arizona State University. In a lot of states, it's housed within the state departments of public health.
Mhm.
So I had opportunities about 10 years ago, and then right now I'm working on a project with them again, which is really wonderful to still be working with this group. So they house all sorts of data related to deaths in Arizona. So whether it's suicides or homicides, and how the deaths occurred, the age of the person, all that sorts of information. So things that are really important for public decision makers to know, kind of what's going on in Arizona from a public health sense. So that was a great opportunity I sort of helped get that off the ground. I had a role in that 10 years ago, and then now I get to kind of play with the data a little bit and report on it. So it's pretty meaningful.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so let's dive in. I know you're doing contract work within the umbrella of your business. Talk about the core of your business. What do you do? Who do you do it for?
So I really have three areas, which is great. I'm never bored. So I do program evaluation work for nonprofit organizations. A lot of times nonprofits have requirements that their programs are evaluated or just looked at for effectiveness by an outside party. Sometimes a requirement from their funder, like, for example, a foundation. So those projects are really meaningful. It keeps me in the social sector. And then I do data analytics work for a couple of marketing agencies, and I'm involved in another marketing company. And so that's fun. It's essentially the same statistical toolbox with an entirely different lingo and business language attached to it. And then I also, as you mentioned, I do when it comes along, I do the litigation support work for attorneys. So in civil cases, when there are big data sets or there's some sort of statistical argument to be made, I can assist attorneys with that.
Awesome. Can you give us maybe a recent example of if you're able to share? Obviously, if you're not, I understand, but
Mhm.
of something on the litigation side that you've worked on.
On the litigation side, so I can't really share anything,
Okay,
but
I thought that might be the case.
yeah, I'll just say though that there are so many almost unimaginable opportunities of where data has gotten into life and businesses, and then whether it's businesses sort of arguing or needing to work something out in court in a litigation setting, and then the data can tell a story and can end up telling a story on different sides.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to go back to something I said in the intro. How do you we use this phrase? I mean, we hear it all over the place, right? Big data, big data, big data.
Mhm.
What
Mhm.
exactly does that mean? Because I think for the kind of the person that isn't in this sector, it's like, what does that mean?
Sure. I think the classic example of big data that everyone understands is when you go to the grocery store and they want to scan your loyalty card, and they're collecting the data of what you just purchased. And they're also collecting what day and time did you buy it. And then if you think about that multiplied over all of the people who went to the store that day, times every day in a year, times maybe all of their stores. And if you think about that as all those sort of data points, they add up to big data. That's a really big data set that grocery store owns, essentially. So that, I think that's a good, and that's big data also, I would say, is something that is kind of continuously fed. So every day they're getting more data. It's not that just stops and that's the end of their data set one day. Tomorrow they're going to have more customers and more data on that customer behavior at the grocery store, that sort of a thing. So and I agree, big data it's a little bit of a buzzword, but it truly does mean big. So for example, to contrast that with, a lot of times I'll work with nonprofits or kind of medium-sized companies, and they don't have big data. They have data, they have small to medium-sized data on maybe their clients or their activities or what they're doing. But big data it truly is really big.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. And this is, I think maybe why it's a buzzword in the business world and we're hearing it so much is companies, organizations, apps, whatever you want to say, are collecting data points on us almost constantly now, right? And there's a lot of controversy around that. Just talk about, what are people talking about in the industry, and what are the upsides, the downsides, if you will?
Sure, I think that's absolutely true. I think what I have found heartening is at least in the people that I've been talking to, a little bit more of a focus on ethics, and at least an awareness and kind of a conversation among the data science community of ethics. And ideally, this transfers to the consumer, to the user, to you and I, that, the companies that are collecting data on us, at least, are we aware of it and becoming aware of it? Do we have options to opt out of the data being collected on us? Or is it sort of on us to seek those opportunities to ask for ways for data not to be collected on us? So for example, with my grocery store example, you can opt to not use the card, not use the loyalty card. Now, the way they get you, of course, is you're going to pay more money because you don't get those, but for a lot of stores, right, you don't get the savings. So in a sense, they're buying your data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see this in every app we use, every time we're on our phone. And it is interesting to me, the people that, understandably are up in arms about, privacy and whatnot. But at the same time, I look at them and say, you're using Facebook for free, right? Somebody has to pay for that. If you're not willing to pay for it, then someone else will, and they're going to pay for it with your eyeballs, basically,
Right.
And so you can't complain. I mean, you can complain, but it's interesting that people, they don't want to pay for anything, but they don't want anybody to track them.
That's absolutely true. And it is, some of these are wonderful tools that add convenience to our life and have enhanced our life. And so we're choosing to use them. Facebook is a great example. About a year ago, I made the personal choice to boycott them and their companies and deleted my Facebook and my Instagram. And it's definitely something I miss a little bit. I know I'm missing things from my friends' lives, but also it was, an awareness of what that company, what their mission is and what they're doing with data. And I can choose to participate in that or not. So
yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And then to your point, I mean, we all make choices, and, we have to understand what the consequences are. So interesting. Well, as somebody who's a business owner as well, and, just kind of giving as an example, using myself as an example, if somebody's thinking about, the data they have in their business, right? We're all creating customer touch points. We're all collecting information in some way. What should business owners be thinking about? We'll say small business owners, because that's the majority of our community. What should they be thinking about as they collect data, both from a privacy perspective, but also from a, hey, what do I do with this information? Because I think a lot of small businesses aren't really thinking about that. Like, how can I really utilize this information to better serve my customers or reach new customers?
Yes, that's a great question. And I think for example, for a small business, I think the key is skip to the end. What would you do with this data, or what data do you wish you had? So it's kind of trendy and maybe almost a pressure for small businesses to be collecting data, but there's nothing wrong with not collecting it if you are aware and you know that it's not something that you need to know. So data should really be collected if it's going to be used to drive business decision making. And it is, like with technology today, it's easier to collect data, and there is a point where it's possible to be collecting data that in the end it's not that useful or not that helpful to what you need to know about your business.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. And I would think similarly with nonprofits. I want to go back to that segment of your business because it's particularly interesting for me. I would imagine some of these organizations, not only from individual funders, but especially those that are getting grant funding in particular, the tracking and measurement of their impact, is everything. Well, not everything, but it's so hugely important. And I would imagine a lot of those organizations, aren't thinking of that out of the gate. Is that, what are you finding as you work with nonprofits, and how they measure and track and use their data?
Yeah, I'm finding that this can be a challenge for nonprofits. So a lot of times for nonprofits, they are sort of struggling and scraping as far as resources just to provide the services that match their mission, let alone to have maybe someone on staff who is thinking about analytics or thinking about measurement. So it's really, it can be an added burden for nonprofits to collect data and think about it. But as you mentioned, it's really important. They know it's important. They know that they must show impact to continue funding, especially nonprofit funding that can come from all different sources that, again, they want to see that the program or the mission or whatever they're doing is having an impact.
Do you have any, I'm asking you the broadest questions on the planet. I apologize, Melissa, but, just even a case study or just, advice of somebody who's listening is, maybe they sit on a nonprofit board, which I know I sit on 2 nonprofit boards, and we're always struggling with this. Just think about, or a case study example for folks in that particular segment.
Sure, certainly. I can tell you about a few years ago I did, and I still do, some work related to homelessness and a homelessness provider organization. And they were collecting a lot of data, actually, and just analyzing a small portion of it. So I helped them to look at all of the data just once, knowing that that's kind of the resources and what we all could afford to do was, okay, I'm going to take 1 year's worth of data and look at all of it. And that can give a picture of, do we need to look at all of this data every year, for example, or are we missing something? Are we collecting too much data? That sort of thing. So that was a great example of, with limited resources, let's just do this once and see if it provides any insight.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because they may be doing a lot of work and collecting a lot of information that they're not ever going to be able to or need to do anything with. And so therefore cutting back on that could be helpful. Yeah, it's interesting. I guess as a follow-up question to that, and I probably know the answer to this or what you're going to say, but I'm just kind of curious to get into it. Bias in data analysis. Do you see this often where somebody's looking at the data, wanting a certain outcome, and maybe only looking at part of the information and not the whole picture, and coming up with the kind of the wrong outcome or information?
I'll say that I actually don't see that a lot, especially in
Okay.
the social sector and the nonprofit space. I don't
Sure.
see that. I think it's people are pretty in that space. If you want to know what the data are saying, you genuinely want to know what the data are saying.
Yeah.
You really are interested in what the answer is and what's going on. Now, and in all sectors and for all businesses, I think it's for a lot of companies, they want to know what's going on and what their data say. They really want to keep it internal.
Mhm.
It's for a marketing agency's client, they really want to know how effective, say, their digital campaigns are, but they're going to keep those answers to themselves, and
Sure.
that will kind of guide what they're going to do. So even if it is that, oh, you know what, that campaign wasn't that effective, they do want to know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Absolutely. Well, talk a little bit, Melissa, if you would, about some of the things that you have coming up in the upcoming year or so, things you're excited about, looking forward to as it relates to your work.
Yeah, exactly. There's so much I'm excited about. I'm so lucky to, as I mentioned, work in kind of all different areas and have a lot of different opportunities to keep my brain happy and engaged. I'm doing some projects in the criminal justice reform space that I'm
Mm,
excited about. The project I mentioned, we're continuing to look at Arizona's violent death data. I think that'll be meaningful and that'll come out this spring. But then also, the advancements in technology and just the embracing of data by marketing agencies and marketing firms, that's been exciting for me to see and be a part of. A couple of agencies, companies that I've been involved with for years now, and just watching them grow and the improvements and kind of the capabilities, that's been fun. So that's always exciting for me too.
oh, fantastic. Well, thank you for the work you're doing. It sounds really interesting, and I'm excited
Oh,
to
thank you.
continue to learn. I'm actually taking a data analysis sort of 101 class that's being hosted here in San Diego next Saturday at Intuit, the company that makes QuickBooks. So I'm excited to get my feet wet and just learn some of the basics, as it's certainly something that I know for my business, we need to do more of, and we're doing some of it, but there's so much great opportunity to ask the right questions and be able to utilize that information to better serve our community, that I'm excited to dive into it.
That's wonderful. And I mean, everyone can and should be a data analyst, even if you want to call it at the 101 level. That's really good to have.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Well, if our listeners want to get in touch with you, so what is the best way for them to do that?
Probably my website, which is firsteval.com, FIRSTEVAL.com, and there's a contact tab there. And so you can email me and my phone number is on there, and that would be great. Or you can find me at Hera Hub in Phoenix.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Melissa. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Felina. This was really fun. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining this week's episode of Flight Club, sponsored by Hera Hub. We look forward to sharing more success stories with you soon.